The ancient world of China is shrouded in many mysteries, some of which are hidden in plain sight. When most people hear the word pyramids, they picture Egypt or the lands of the Americas. Yet few know that hundreds of similar monumental structures exist within China. This information isn't entirely secret, but its scale and the details surrounding it are astounding. Even more surprisingly, a significant portion of these ancient pyramids is inaccessible to both tourists and independent researchers. It is extremely difficult to find high-quality, detailed photographs of many of these sites in the public domain. Most available images are old, blurry, and taken from a distance. One gets the impression that these structures are being intentionally concealed. Their slopes have been deliberately covered with earth and planted with fast-growing trees and shrubs. Over time, the root systems of these plants penetrate the masonry, destroying what has been preserved for millennia. This can be interpreted in two ways, either as astonishing negligence toward one's own heritage, or as a conscious and methodical effort to erase these objects from the face of the earth, hiding them under a veil of nature. Why go to such lengths to hide the traces of the past? This question becomes even more pointed when one recalls that pyramid-like structures are found on 4 continents, hinting at the possible existence of a single, global civilization in deep antiquity. Skeptics might argue that a pyramid is the simplest, stable structure, but when it comes to megalithic masonry of multi-ton blocks, fitted together perfectly, the explanation of simple form no longer works. And the fact that there are hundreds of such objects in China, yet only a small fraction are open for study, is in itself grounds for serious suspicion. If the authorities are willing to hide entire complexes of ancient pyramids, then what even greater secret might their most famous, most massive, and most celebrated monument hold? The Great Wall of China. The mystery of the pyramids is just the tip of the iceberg, an introduction to a much deeper secret. Let us now turn to the main symbol of China and see how the commonly accepted, textbook version of its purpose begins to crumble to dust when faced with the very first logical questions. The official story, told in schools and guidebooks, sounds simple and heroic. The Great Wall of China was built to protect the peaceful farmers of the Celestial Empire from the fierce and unpredictable nomadic tribes of the north. For centuries, these hordes supposedly launched swift raids, plundering settlements, taking crops, and carrying people away. The wall was meant to be an insurmountable barrier, a symbol of the resilience and power of Chinese civilization. But the deeper one delves into the details of this grand project, the clearer it becomes that this version does not withstand even a basic test of common sense. Let's start with the most obvious question: its location. A significant portion of the wall runs along the ridges of high mountains, in remote and sparsely populated areas. Construction in such conditions was incredibly difficult and demanded a colossal expenditure of human lives and resources. Every stone had to be lifted to great heights, up steep slopes. But why? The main striking force of the nomads was their cavalry, mobile units of horsemen whose strength lay in speed and maneuverability on open terrain. Mountain ranges and narrow gorges are the worst places to wage war with large mounted armies. Horses need fodder and water, and a vast army needs wide routes for movement and supply lines. Trying to lead a massive army through rocky passes, where any detachment could be ambushed, is a tactical absurdity. Any commander in their right mind would prefer to bypass the mountains and strike across the plains, for example from the direction of the modern Mongolian steppes. The conditions there are ideal for cavalry. Yet for some reason, the builders of the wall ignored this logic and erected their most powerful fortification precisely where it would have been most difficult for an enemy to pass anyway. Wouldn't it have been simpler and more effective to wall off the plains? leaving the mountains as a natural barrier. Then another strange point arises concerning the behavior of the nomads themselves. According to the official history, they lived for decades, even centuries, by plundering Chinese lands. This was their main source of income and prosperity, and then, at some point, the Chinese begin to build a gigantic wall that will forever cut off their access to easy loot. What should any rationally thinking adversary do in such a situation? Of course, they would do everything in their power to disrupt the construction. They would attack the workers, destroy completed sections, and intercept caravans with food and materials. However, historical chronicles contain no records of such large-scale and constant attacks on the construction project of the century. It seems the nomads, whose very prosperity was under direct threat, simply stood by and passively watched as they were cut off from their vital resources. An objection might be raised here. Perhaps the construction was protected by a mighty Chinese army. But this assumption gives rise to an even greater paradox. If China had an army so strong and numerous that it could successfully defend thousands of kilometers of construction work over many years from those same invincible nomadic hordes, then why was the wall needed at all? An army capable of ensuring the security of such a giant project is already the best defense a country can have. It could just as well have simply guarded the borders without resorting to building a stone barrier. The picture becomes completely absurd. The Chinese army somehow miraculously became invincible for the duration of the construction, but before and after, it was supposedly unable to protect the country without a wall. This sounds less like real history and more like a fairy tale where all laws of logic are broken. The official version is riddled with internal contradictions. It cannot coherently explain the choice of location for the construction, the passivity of the enemy, or the strange logic of military strategy. But perhaps the answers lie not in logical reasoning, but in material evidence. If bloody battles were fought at the wall for centuries, the earth should hold the traces of these conflicts. Let's see what the archaeological excavations tell us. If the logic of the official version collapses under the weight of simple questions, perhaps material evidence can come to its aid. The history of war always leaves deep scars on the land. The centuries of continuous battles that historians tell us about should have left behind irrefutable traces. Picture it. Vast armies of nomads, numbering tens of thousands of horsemen, storming the wall again and again. The defenders, in turn, shower them with clouds of arrows, drop stones, and engage in desperate clashes at the breaches. Such a centuries-long confrontation would inevitably have led to the creation of giant battlefields, littered with artifacts. Archaeologists should have found cultural layers at the foot of the wall, saturated with arrowheads, fragments of blades, pieces of armor, and horse harnesses. The earth should hold the remains of thousands upon thousands of fallen warriors and their horses. We should have discovered mass graves, hastily dug after another bloody battle, or simply countless unburied skeletons covered by sand and time. After all, we're not talking about a single skirmish, but constant, grueling warfare over hundreds of years. However, the reality is stunning in its emptiness. Archaeological research conducted near the wall has revealed nothing of the sort. There are no giant cemeteries, no layers filled with weapons. The ground around the Great Wall is surprisingly clean, as if no large-scale fierce battles ever took place here. Where did these mythical hordes vanish? Did they really assault the wall for centuries without leaving a single trace? This archaeological silence becomes even more deafening when we turn to written sources. Any great civilization meticulously documents events of national importance. The construction of the Great Wall of China was, without a doubt, the most grandiose, labor-intensive, and costly project in the history of ancient China. It involved, by various estimates, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of laborers. Construction lasted for decades, consuming colossal state resources. Thousands of people must have perished from grueling labor, hunger, and disease. Such an epochal event simply had to leave the deepest mark in official chronicles, annals, poetry, and folklore. Yet here too, we are met with disappointment. In Chinese historical documents, detailed descriptions of this grand construction are virtually absent. For comparison, in the chronicles of medieval Europe or the Middle East, one can find detailed reports on the construction of far more modest structures, cathedrals, fortresses, or palaces. They mention the names of architects and rulers, patrons, record the start and end dates of the work, and describe difficulties and tragedies. But the Great Wall of China, stretching for thousands of kilometers, seems to have been built in an informational shadow. It is mentioned only in general terms, without specifics, without names, without numbers, without dramatic details. Why? There are only two plausible explanations. Either the construction was not what we are led to believe, and the true origin of the wall is something else entirely, or the information was deliberately erased or hidden from future generations. If people knew the truth about the wall's real purpose, the entire official version of history could collapse. So we are faced with a striking fact. We have one of the greatest structures on the planet, but we have neither material nor written evidence for the story we are told about it. History is silent. The earth is empty. It seems that no great war ever took place at the wall. But the wall stands. It is real. And if we look at it more closely, it itself, by its very design, may reveal its true purpose. And that truth is shocking. When logic reaches a dead end, and material evidence is absent, the answer must be sought in the object of study itself. The Great Wall of China is not just a stone ridge, but a complex fortification system, consisting of the wall itself, signal towers, casemates, and battlements. And it is in the placement of these key defensive elements that the main clue lies, one capable of turning our entire understanding of its purpose upside down. The architecture of any defensive structure follows a strict and unambiguous logic. All of its fortifications must be directed toward the supposed enemy. Merlins, loopholes, towers, all are created so that defenders can effectively fire upon attackers while remaining in relative safety. If the Great Wall were truly built for defense against the northern nomads, then all of its battlements, without exception, should have faced north, toward the enemy. This is an axiom of military engineering that requires no proof. However, a close examination of many sections of the wall, especially those far from popular tourist routes, reveals a striking and inexplicable picture from the perspective of the official history. For significant lengths of the wall, the battlements and defensive platforms on the towers face not outward, but inward, to the south, toward China itself. This fact completely shatters the myth of the wall as a defensive shield. To imagine that the ancient engineers who built the most grandiose structure in history could have, accidentally, by mistake, turned entire sections of fortifications in the opposite direction is simply impossible. The construction was carried out over centuries, involving millions of people under the guidance of experienced military leaders and fortifiers. Such a mistake, repeated in different sections built at different times, is out of the question. This was not an accident, but a cold and calculated design. It was intentional. But then the main question arises. Why would the builders aim their weapons at their own territory? Why would defenders target those they were supposedly meant to protect? There can be only one answer, and it is as logical as it is terrifying. Fortifications are aimed at the threat they are designed to contain. If the battlements face inward, it means the main danger was expected from within. The wall was built not to keep someone out, but to keep someone in. This simple but shocking idea changes everything. We are not looking at a great defensive barrier, but the walls of the largest prison in human history. A vast, enclosed territory from which it was impossible to escape. The towers with battlements facing inward are transformed from defensive posts into watchtowers and firing points to suppress escape attempts. They are perfectly suited not for repelling external attacks, but for controlling the internal population and firing on their own people if they tried to breach the barrier. The entire structure of the wall, which seemed illogical from the point of view of defense against an external enemy, acquires a sinister and clear meaning when viewed as a prison enclosure. This is no longer just a theory based on a lack of evidence, but a conclusion dictated by the structural features of the monument itself. The Great Wall itself testifies against its official legend. The battlements facing its own people are the strongest, but not the only, piece of evidence pointing to the true purpose of this monument. There is another, no less important fact, confirmed by eyewitness accounts. It turns out that getting into this giant prison was much easier than getting out of it. The architectural features of the wall, such as the battlements facing inward, are a powerful piece of evidence, but they become irrefutable proof in light of another, equally important structural aspect. This detail is not visible on satellite images and is rarely mentioned in official sources, but it is described by the few who venture to explore the remote, non-tourist sections of the wall. Information from one such traveler, who had the opportunity to visit the wild and abandoned sectors of this structure, allows us to fit all the pieces of the puzzle into a single, coherent picture. His experience, which at first seemed merely a curious observation, later took on key significance. While traveling along the wall, he discovered a striking pattern in its construction. On the outer northern side, the side that was supposed to face the enemy hordes, the wall in many places has a relatively gentle slope. The stonework there is often rough, with numerous ledges and protrusions that can serve as handholds and footholds. A person in good physical condition, even without special equipment, would have little trouble climbing up this outer face. This observation completely nullifies the wall's defensive function. What is the point of a multi-kilometer barrier if the enemy can easily overcome it simply by climbing up? But the most astonishing discovery is made when looking at the wall from the inner, southern side. Here, the picture changes dramatically. The inner wall is almost everywhere a sheer, nearly smooth vertical surface several meters high. To overcome it from the bottom up, from the Chinese side, is practically impossible without the help of ladders or climbing gear. The high, smooth parapet leaves no chance for anyone trying to get out. Now all the disparate facts fall into place. The inward-facing battlements and the asymmetrical construction of the wall are two sides of the same coin. They serve the same purpose. It's easy to get in, but impossible to get out. The relatively gentle outer slope was simply of no importance to the builders, as their task was not to repel an external assault. Their main goal was to create an insurmountable obstacle for those inside. The sheer inner wall is the perfect engineering solution to prevent escape, and the battlements aimed at this same inner territory allowed the guards stationed on the wall to effectively stop any attempts to approach and overcome the barrier. An image emerges that is staggering in its scale and cruelty. This is not just a wall, but the perimeter of a gigantic containment zone, a trap the size of an entire country. A vast territory, inhabited by millions of people, was enclosed by a prison fence of colossal dimensions. For the inhabitants of this zone, the horizon was not a line of freedom, but a stone reminder of their confinement. Every dawn illuminated the battlements of towers from which they were relentlessly watched. Any thought of escape was shattered against a smooth, sheer surface, reaching for the sky. This was the most massive penitentiary institution in human history, designed with cold and ruthless calculation. The facts point to one thing. The Great Wall of China was built not as a shield, but as a cage. The logic of its location, the absence of archaeological traces of wars, and above all, its own architecture, with battlements facing inward and an impregnable inner side, all speak to its true purpose. It was designed to keep someone inside. But the main question remains unanswered. So, when all the pieces of the puzzle fall into place, we are faced with a monumental and disturbing picture. The logical inconsistencies in the official history, the complete absence of archaeological traces of great wars, and most importantly, the irrefutable evidence embedded in the wall's very architecture, all point to one possible conclusion. The Great Wall of China was built not for protection, but for isolation. It was not a fortress, but a prison. But if that is the case, then the most important and most terrifying question arises. Who was it holding in? Who or what needed to be isolated with the most grandiose structure in human history? Here we enter the realm of hypotheses, because there are, of course, no direct answers in the sources that have come down to us. If the truth was so monstrous that it had to be hidden for millennia, then all references to it would have been meticulously destroyed. However, based on the available facts, we can consider several versions. The first, most rational hypothesis is that the wall contained a huge number of people deemed undesirable by the ruling regime. These might not have been just criminals, but entire social classes, political opponents, rebellious provinces, or conquered peoples. In that case, the Great Wall was not just a prison, but a gigantic forced labor system, a zone of no return. Millions of people could have been herded into this territory and locked there forever to ensure the stability of the empire. The scale of this act is staggering, but it would explain both the colossal costs of construction and the brutal functionality of the wall itself. A second version goes even further. Perhaps it was not about isolating a part of one's own population, but about containing an entire, completely different people. What if, before the arrival of those we know as the Chinese, another civilization lived in these territories? Perhaps an older and, in some respects, more advanced one. After a long conflict, this civilization might have been defeated, and the remnants of its people driven into the northern territories and sealed off by the wall, to erase the very memory of their existence. This would also explain the informational vacuum surrounding the construction. The victors would not have described in their chronicles the building of a wall for the genocide and eternal imprisonment of their enemies. Finally, there is a third, most daring hypothesis, which goes beyond conventional history. What if those who were isolated were not just another people, but something more? If we recall the mysterious Chinese pyramids, which are also being hidden, one could speculate that the wall was part of a global process of concealing the traces of some ancient, perhaps not entirely human, civilization. What if the wall was containing the last bearers of knowledge or abilities that the new power considered dangerous? In this context, the wall becomes a barrier, not just between two peoples, but between two worlds, two realities. An old one, full of mysteries and power, and a new one, orderly and controlled. Whatever the truth may be, it points to one thing. The reason for building such a prison wall must have been extremely compelling. The threat posed by the inmates must have been so serious that it justified any sacrifice and any expense. We cannot give a final answer, but we can urge you not to take any version at face value, including the official one. Study, search for information yourself. Compare photographs of the tourist-friendly, perfectly restored sections of the wall with the rare images taken by independent travelers in its wild, abandoned parts. Pay attention to the details. The slope of the walls, the direction of the battlements, the absence of any signs of a centuries-long defense. The true purpose of the Great Wall may forever remain a secret, buried under layers of time and deliberate deception. But one thing is certain. The story they tell us in school is just a beautiful fairy tale, hiding something far more massive and perhaps far more frightening.